Images of dead or gravely injured children are one of the last remaining taboos in news. They are shown only in the most extraordinary circumstances, and the blowback can be intense. That was the case this week when a photographer captured the final moments of a 5-year-old Nebraska girl pulled from a tornado-ravaged home. Please take note, some viewers may find this material disturbing. Mark Storm Farnick is a self-described storm photographer, or what others call a storm chaser. The people who feed our insatiable appetite for images of nature's destructive fury. When a rare double tornado plunged through Pilgrim, Nebraska on Monday, Farnick arrived just as rescue workers were comforting 5-year-old Callista Dixon. At her moment of death, Farnick took the picture, selling it to the Associated Press, which fed the image to outlets like the Washington Post. That unleashed a firestorm of protest like this. Storm Farnick, you're a coward. Be a man and make money off yourself and not 5-year-old dying girls. In particular, Farnick was excoriated for posting this on Facebook just 2 weeks earlier. I need some highly photogenic and destructive tornadoes to make it rain for me financially. Farnick apologized for that comment but defends taking the picture, calling it a grim representation of what happened in this small Nebraska town. Well, there's a couple of issues here. One, taking the photograph in the first place. I certainly don't blame him for that. He couldn't have known exactly at that moment that she was dying. The second one is distributing it and leaving it to the will of any news organization to do what they will with it, and then having those news organizations print it. We were debating in our own newsroom whether it was valid, because in other times, the ravages of war or some extraordinary circumstance when it was, a murder or, some horrible circumstance, and you're showing what can happen. When it's an act of nature, it kind of puts it in a different circumstance. I happen to think, and I know it's controversial, that it's okay. It's he didn't create what happened. It's the result of something horrible that happened. But the third thing is then kind of making money on it. And I think that's where it crosses into sort of the distasteful, and that's clearly he had a financial gain in mind.
Well, I have to say it doesn't bother me. I think it was certainly newsworthy. This terrible tornado had come through town, and this little girl had been, fatally injured, obviously. He said that he had a much more graphic photo that he ended up deleting from his camera. What he did sell was not particularly graphic. The news organizations that ran the photo include the Associated Press and the Washington Post. These are organizations with very high standards and ethics. And as far as him getting paid, this is what he does for a living. And I don't think the fact that he said he wanted some photogenic tornadoes to take pictures of should be held against him. He's a storm chaser, and this happened to tragically be a victim of that. But I don't think it was done in a distasteful manner.
Anybody disagree?
I think it's okay to hold the fact that he said he needed some highly photogenic tornadoes against him, because he signed off after he made that statement on Facebook, "Okay, thanks, bye," sort of indicating that the objections being raised by his critics were, a very flip way to make the point he made. This, I do think, raises a really interesting question about what photography is for. I have young kids. I didn't want to look at this image initially, and when I did, I found it a lot more troubling than Dan did. That being said, on the one hand, you could make the argument that photography is for, affecting public policy changes. We'll see what's happening in Sudan, and that will make us decide that our elected leaders should handle the situation differently, that there's sort of a practical end. But you could also make an argument that photography has a more spiritual aim, that it is about connecting you with reality in a way that you might not otherwise be connected. And I'll tell you, after looking at the image, I felt a hell of a lot more viscerally what happened in that town than I did when I was just reading about it. So I think ultimately I come down on the side of it's okay to show this. It's okay he did what he did. I just wish he'd presented it a little differently.
I think it was okay for him to take the picture. I'm reminded of that photograph, at 9/11, or when they're holding the baby. With Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
I mean, that is that will stay with me. And as you say, he didn't know at the moment that she was dying. I sort of went to look at the picture with both my eyes almost closed because I didn't really want to see it. But I do think that it added something to the visceral understanding of what people go through in that part of the country, or when something like that happens in their part of the world. I also think where some of that pushback comes from people who really don't understand what journalists do, and I get it because we're not very good often in explaining it, and it made coming behind his 2 weeks earlier statement that I'm out here to make money, put that in a different kind of context. Though I do think we have to separate that. I actually do. I think at the moment that he was doing it, that wasn't what he was thinking about. I really don't think so. You can try to deal with reputable news organizations and put some limits about how it works. I mean, probably stuff is going to continue to get out, but maybe you can slow it down. He could have done that. That's what ended up happening with Oklahoma, by the way.
One of the problems is that these guys really have a reputation as kind of being like cowboys, yahoos, storm chasers, and let's face it, they're going for the grittiest, the most dramatic pictures they can. So I think that's part of it, and this speaks to what you said, Adam, about him being kind of flip. I mean, this is what he does, which is different from some of the great photojournalists of the world.
I should mention, Dan, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, if you look at a lot of the pictures that he's posted, they're these dramatic pictures of tornadoes.
Right.
And I really think that's what he was referring to when he said, I need some photogenic tornadoes
not
to
the
make
people.
money from.
Yes,
not,
right.
That's a good point.
Not dying 5-year-old girls.
Exactly.
Remember a couple years back when there was that horrific earthquake in China?
Yeah. Yes.
I remember, it's etched in my brain, this image that I think, I don't know where the photographer was from, but it ran on the top of the New York Times, and it was this sort of broad shot of a parent sitting over the body of their child who had died in the earthquake. And again, as I say that, I actually feel my stomach sort of contract. And again, I had heard about that earthquake ad nauseum. I'd become inured to it. And when I saw that image, it just socked me.
I think we're all
and I think we also have to understand that Americans are really pretty chicken about looking at anything that has to do with death, period. Any kind of photographs. It's not like other places in the world where they routinely show these photos.